Bring in Florida trial attorney Alexis Rosenberg. Alexis, great to see you. Have you heard? I've heard of cons before. This one's different.
Well, Jesse, thank you for having me. I mean, there's a lot to unpack here. One of the first things that jumps out at me is what the heck was going on in Advent Health? They have a duty to make sure that their healthcare professionals are appropriately credentialed and have license before they set them loose on patients.
What is the legal exposure for Advent Health? Because this is not, catch me if you can. This is a situation where, well, and a little bit in the movie, but a little bit, I mean, you're talking about somebody who really didn't have the authority, the license to treat these patients in the way that she presumably did. Do they go back and look at the cases of every one of these people she treated, and if God forbid something happened to them, can Advent Health now be on the hook because of what this person may or may not have done? I mean, yes, and these are just allegations at this point, but just taking it as true, you have to wonder what the ripple effects are.
Well, first, I think you're aging both of us with the catch me if you can. But yes, Advent Health does have exposure. They have an obligation to make sure that like I said before, their professionals are appropriately licensed and credentialed. So you also have the issue there's potentially an issue with billing. I'm assuming that they have billed what's called government entitlements, such as Medicare and Medicaid, and they've gotten paid for these services that were fraudulently billed, in essence, because this particular provider wasn't appropriately licensed. So they have that issue, along with potential if she, and we don't know yet, if she created or caused any physical harm to these patients. But if, let's say that she did, and there's a malpractice lawsuit, then they would potentially be liable civilly for that as well. If Medicare and Medicaid potentially believe that Advent had knowledge of this or should have had knowledge, there potentially could be a cause of action for Medicare and Medicaid fraud, potentially on the criminal level.
By the way, my understanding is she got fired from Advent Health months ago, and in that body cam video, she's wearing scrubs. Like, did she, take the test? Did she get a real license? Did she get a job somewhere else? That's something that would confuse me.
Well, it's definitely something of a concern. Is she still practicing somewhere else? Did she get someone else to hire? What jumped out at me about this story was also that the number that she was using for this other Autumn actually worked for Advent Health as well. So I'm a little confused why, when they put it in their system with that number, that it didn't pop up that the real Autumn was at a different location for the same company.
Alexis, that's a good point. I mean, we were talking about what was her treatment like. If she was going to get a promotion, she was probably doing a good job. Look, if that is true, that no one was harmed, that would be the best news. It's wild, to say the least. And I am curious, he makes the point, you can't charge, or you could, but it'd be so impractical, over 4,000 counts. Does the way that they're charging her make sense to you? Are 14 total charges enough, given the scope of her alleged crimes?
Well, I handle cases that have to do with healthcare fraud in New York and Florida. And I have to say that it's a little more complicated with them proving this, because it's not simply that she necessarily held herself out because it was a nurse, unlike a doctor scenario. So it really depends on those treatment records. If she was providing, let's say, doing things in those records that reflect that she was acting and doing duties such as an RN. So I think that's when he was getting into proving it, it would boggle it down, where we just do 7. I mean, she's facing some serious charges based on the 7 counts. Really, there's mandatory minimums just for using the other person's information that attached just to that, opposed to the practicing, the medicine. But also what jumped out at me is that he was saying something about HIPAA, and in what it is contained in the information that's out there is that Advent Health was dragging their feet, turning over that information. There was a subpoena that was issued, and they kept on trying to get extensions. So it was them that was on top of everything else, dragging their feet to actually provide law enforcement with how many patients she actually allegedly treated, and the record stating what she actually did in that alleged treatment.
By the way, as far as I understand at the time of this recording, there is no outcry witness, right? No specific person who came forward to say they were a victim, to get, an investigation going. Does that make a difference in how she's charged or how the case moves forward?
Not with the charges that she's been charged with. For instance, the misusing of the information is more or less that you look at, depending on the count, whether it's first degree, second degree, or third degree, whether, how many victims. In this case, there's really only one victim that she stole their personal information, and then how much financial gain that she got. Now, if you look up the average nurse RN in Florida makes about 80,000. She was doing this for 7 months. So, we're under what would be first degree of 50,000, and we're in between, and there's mandatory minimums for that. Now, with the practicing medicine, it's not really necessarily, like he said, you could do 4,000 because there's 4,000 alleged victims. But I think what they did is once you get, it just gets ridiculous. Doing the 7 was probably a good approach.
Just to make this a little bit, clarify this point, how complicated is it to bring a case like this to court? A lot to consider: privacy laws, hospital policies related to the release of information, witnesses who may be reluctant to talk because a lot of different issues, fear of retaliation, embarrassment, you trying to make sense of what the impact is that she might have had at this medical health institution. What do you think?
So the counts related to stealing the one individual it seems to be pretty straightforward. The counts related to practicing without a license, once you get in court, they'll be able to get subpoenas. There's also ways, even with HIPAA, to turn over records that you could redact certain things. You could get releases. It's not super complicated once they've now filed charges to get that necessary information. I think once it's tried, a good defense attorney is really going to attack those records to say, listen, she really wasn't acting as an RN. Because remember, she was employed for, I believe, almost 2 years prior, not under or acting as an RN. So, you would really look at those records and say, okay, what's contained in the records that they're saying she actually did wouldn't necessarily qualify for someone acting as an RN. And that would be, a strategy to take as a defense attorney to get this down. Now, the taking of the personal information, I think that's going to be a really hard to overcome.
What could her defense be?
The defense I don't see a defense for taking the personal information. I do see, like I stated before, the defense that even though they had given her for those 7 months that label or title as an RN, that she actually was still not performing RN duties. And that's really going to lie in those medical records.
Now, Alexis, one would think that Advent Health Systems would catch that 2 different people were using the same license number. This, at the very least, is a wake-up call to them.
Well, I think it goes beyond. I think, in my opinion, it's complete negligence on their part. That, yes, you're right. She was in their system, the real Autumn was in their system already, so that should have raised red flags. But just the follow-up or the whole process, in my opinion, they were negligent. But yeah, I mean, I honestly, I disagree with the sheriff, though. I don't know how uncommon. I think because we have the 2 Autumns, because in Miami you hear about, people practicing medicine without a license on the regular.
Oh, yeah, that's a thing? Oh, boy. Maybe we got to dedicate another sidebar to that. All right, well, I'll tell you what. When we stick with Bardisa, though, for a second, more of her alleged misconduct was detailed in court documents. So the chief nursing officer for Advent Health was tasked with doing an investigation and uncovered that she'd allegedly given drugs to fellow employees, including the weight loss drug Ozempic. Quote, her statement further mentioned that an unidentified employee came forward stating that they had purchased prescription medication from Autumn Bardisa, which was identified as semaglutide, commonly referred to as Ozempic. The same unidentified employee stated that Autumn Bardisa had previously administered a birth control injection to a second unidentified employee. It had not been identified by Advent Health where the prescriptions were filled. As if the allegations couldn't get worse, Alexis. What do you make about this?
Well, so
And by
it's
the way,
going to come.
why no drug charges? Why no drug charges either?
Well, that's a good question. But I mean, more important, so at some time during this, she did have her certified nursing assistant certificate license. And I think it expired right before the year before. So I'm not sure in time when all that happened. But as a certified nursing assistant, you're not allowed to inject medicine. So the injection is a problem under that license. So that would go towards what we were talking about. Was she doing stuff that was something that an RN could do, opposed to someone that did not have an RN license? So you're not allowed to dispense, she wouldn't be allowed to prescribe medication, and nor would she be allowed to inject anybody with a medication. So that's a problem. And those, even though they're being marked now as unidentified, I'm pretty sure that it's going to come out who those are. It sounds almost what you were saying, Jesse, that this person who came forward was a little unhappy about them maybe getting promoted and the other person not, and went on a
Yeah.
deep dive to find out, what was about this person.